They called it the Mud Kingdom. For over 40 years, Arthur Vance watched the tax assessors, the bank auditors, and his own neighbors point at the maps of his 90-acre property and shake their heads. To the county, his land wasn't just unviable for farming, it was an active financial hazard. A massive, stubborn bowl of heavy gray clay, limestone shelves, and unpredictable subterranean marshland that swallowed tractor tires whole and choked out any crop deeper than wild sawgrass. When the official valuation notice arrived in the spring of 2024, the county had stamped it with an official assessment value of exactly $12,000. Total. The paper described it as topographically compromised acreage with zero agricultural or residential utility. Arthur kept that paper pinned to his kitchen cabinet with a rusty tractor magnet, not out of spite, but as a reminder of what the world thought of his life's work. His neighbors urged him to let the bank take it, to sign the foreclosure papers and walk away to a tiny apartment in the city. They said he was bleeding himself dry for a graveyard of rocks and mud. But Arthur knew something the county assessors couldn't see on their satellite topography scans. He knew the mud had a memory, and more importantly, he knew what sat exactly 300 feet beneath the limestone shelf. The turning point didn't begin with a corporate limousine or a formal legal notice. It began with an old man noticing the birds. For 3 generations, the Vance family had watched the seasonal migration patterns across the valley, but by midsummer, Arthur noticed the red-tailed hawks were no longer nesting in the western timberline. They had moved to the absolute center of the mud flats, circling a specific 3-acre depression where the ground stayed freezing cold even in July. Arthur began taking daily walks out to that depression, carrying an old brass surveyor's level and a notebook that belonged to his grandfather. He discovered that while the top 3 feet of soil was an unworkable, gelatinous soup of clay, the structural foundation underneath wasn't shifting. In fact, it hadn't shifted in a century. While the county's digital maps labeled the entire zone a sinkhole risk, Arthur's manual measurements proved the underlying bedrock was a massive, continuous formation of solid greenstone granite, an incredibly dense, near-impenetrable subterranean wall. At the exact same time, 60 miles to the north, a massive logistical crisis was quietly unfolding. The state's largest deep-water shipping port had just greenlit a multi-billion-dollar expansion, but they hit a catastrophic bottleneck. The existing freight rail lines running through the mountain pass were maxed out, buckling under weight limits, and dangerously close to residential zones. The rail conglomerates needed a new, dead-straight, high-capacity bypass to move heavy lithium and steel freight across the state. They needed a route with an absolute 0-degree grade, capable of supporting million-pound cargo trains without sinking an inch. They drew a straight line on the map from the port to the southern hub. That line ran directly through the heart of the valley. It ran directly through Arthur's worthless mud. When the first scout team from Mid-Continent Rail arrived in the valley, they didn't even knock on Arthur's door. They spent 3 days parked on the public county road, operating ground-penetrating radar equipment from the back of an unmarked white utility van. Arthur watched them through his hunting binoculars from the porch, sipping his black coffee. He knew exactly what their screens were showing. The rail engineers were looking for a miracle, and they had just found it. To build a high-capacity freight line through the valley, any normal route would require digging out millions of tons of soft topsoil and pouring millions of dollars of artificial concrete aggregate to create a stable rail bed. But Arthur's farm was different. The 90 acres of worthless mud was actually a natural geological anomaly, a perfect, solid granite causeway hidden just beneath a thin layer of clay. It was the only piece of land in a 50-mile radius that could support the weight of the new ultra-heavy freight locomotives without requiring billions in foundational engineering. 2 days later, a man in a tailor-made suit walked up Arthur's gravel driveway, carrying a leather briefcase and an initial offer sheet for $500,000 for a simple transit easement. Arthur didn't even invite him inside. He looked at the suit, looked at the paper, and pointed to the tax assessment on his kitchen cabinet through the window. "The county says it's worth $12,000, Arthur said calmly. "So if you want it, you're going to have to pay for what's underneath the mud, not what's on top of it." The negotiator laughed, assuming the old farmer was bluffing. He told Arthur they would simply reroute the tracks around his property through the neighboring Miller estate. What the negotiator didn't know was that Arthur had already spent the previous winter buying up the narrow mineral rights to the only two access gaps flanking the Miller property for a few $100s each. Mid-Continent Rail was completely boxed in. They couldn't go left, they couldn't go right, and they couldn't dig through the valley without Arthur's signature. Over the next 6 weeks, the initial $500,000 offer quietly doubled, then tripled, then exploded into 7 figures as the shipping port's grand opening date loomed closer and closer, threatening the railroad with millions in daily delay penalties if they didn't lay the tracks. But just as the final contract for $3.8 million was being drafted, Arthur received an urgent late-night phone call from an anonymous whistleblower inside the county zoning office. The railroad company wasn't just planning to lay down tracks, they had discovered a massive, untapped lithium-bearing brine aquifer locked directly inside that deep greenstone granite formation. The easement contract Arthur was about to sign would have stripped him of all subsurface mineral rights forever, leaving him with a multi-million-dollar payout but costing his family a generational fortune worth 50 times that amount. Even worse, the county council, realizing they had missed out on millions in tax revenue by valuing the farm at $12,000, was quietly preparing an emergency eminent domain claim to seize the land under the guise of critical public infrastructure. Arthur was now facing a dual-front war against a multi-billion-dollar rail monopoly and a corrupt local government determined to take his land for pennies on the dollar. He had less than 24 hours to execute a dangerous legal counter-strategy before the courthouse doors opened at 9 a.m., a plan that relied entirely on an obscure 1882 homesteading law that everyone else had forgotten. If he failed, he would lose the farm, the money, and his family's legacy forever. What would you do if you discovered the land everyone mocked was actually sitting on a goldmine? Would you take the quick millions and run, or would you risk everything to fight the system? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to see who would have the guts to hold out like Arthur did. If you love stories about regular people outsmarting corrupt systems, make sure to hit that like button right now and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our weekly deep dives into history's greatest hidden fortunes. Don't click away just yet, the real victory is even wilder than you think. Click on the video popping up on your screen right now to see exactly how Arthur used that forgotten 1882 law to completely bankrupt the corrupt county council and secure his family's empire forever. Watch it now, and we'll see you there.